July 1944. Normandy, hedgerow country, France. The American tank crew from Company B, 7th Armored Division, approached the abandoned Panzer Four cautiously, their boots crunching through the shattered remains of a German defensive position. The tank sat motionless among destroyed equipment and hastily dug foxholes, its long-barreled 75mm gun pointed uselessly toward empty fields. Sergeant James Mitchell from Detroit, Michigan, a former automotive mechanic who had worked at Ford's River Rouge plant before the war, climbed onto the hull with his crew following close behind. They had orders to examine any intact German equipment for intelligence purposes, but Mitchell had personal reasons for this inspection. He wanted to understand how German tankers lived and fought inside these machines that American crews had learned to fear and respect. What Mitchell and his crew discovered inside that Panzer Four would challenge every assumption they held about German engineering superiority and tactical effectiveness. The cramped, austere fighting compartment revealed design priorities that sacrificed crew comfort, operational efficiency, and combat effectiveness for specifications that looked impressive on paper but created nearly intolerable working conditions for the men who had to fight in these vehicles day after day. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Mitchell pried open the commander's cupola hatch, the heavy steel door swinging upward with surprising effort despite well-maintained hinges. The interior smell hit him immediately, a mixture of burned propellant residue, machine oil, unwashed bodies, and the peculiar metallic tang that pervaded all armored vehicles. But it was the visual impression that stopped him cold. The fighting compartment seemed impossibly small, far more confined than he had imagined from external dimensions that suggested reasonable internal volume. The turret basket diameter measured barely large enough for two men to stand side by side without touching, creating a circular workspace that felt claustrophobic even when stationary and empty. Mitchell had spent hundreds of hours inside Sherman turrets during training and combat operations. The Sherman felt spacious by comparison, almost generous in its internal arrangements. This Panzer Four turret seemed designed for smaller men, working in positions that allowed minimal movement. He lowered himself through the commander's hatch, his feet finding the turret floor with difficulty as he navigated around ammunition, storage bins, and equipment stowage that occupied every available surface. His gunner, Corporal Robert Chen from San Francisco, California, followed him down, squeezing through the hatch opening and immediately bumping his head on the gun breech despite moving carefully. Chen swore quietly, rubbing his skull, where the heavy steel mechanism had struck him. The commander's station offered a rotating seat with minimal padding, positioned on the right side of the turret, with the commander's periscope and cupola directly above. The seat provided adequate vision when the commander stood with his head and shoulders protruding through the open cupola, the standard combat position for maintaining situational awareness. But combat operations frequently required closed hatches, particularly when enemy artillery or infantry occupied the immediate area. In buttoned-up configuration, the commander relied entirely on periscope vision, with severely restricted fields of view that made comprehensive battlefield observation nearly impossible. Mitchell examined the vision devices available to the German commander, comparing them mentally to Sherman equipment he knew intimately from daily use. The Panzer Four commander's cupola featured 6 vision blocks arranged around the perimeter, each providing a narrow viewing angle through thick armored glass. The blocks offered protection from small arms fire and shell fragments, but created significant blind spots between viewing angles. The Sherman commander's cupola, by contrast, featured a continuous ring of vision blocks, providing nearly 360 degrees of observation with minimal blind spots, allowing comprehensive battlefield awareness even when buttoned up completely. The gunner's position occupied the left side of the turret, directly behind the 75mm main gun that dominated the fighting compartment. Chen wedged himself into the gunner's seat, a simple metal frame with canvas sling that provided minimal comfort during extended operations. The gun sight protruded from the turret front armor, a binocular telescope offering magnified vision of the target area, but requiring the gunner to press his face against rubber eye cups that blocked all peripheral vision. Chen manipulated the manual traverse controls. Twin hand wheels that required continuous cranking to rotate the turret. The mechanical advantage provided by the gear reduction allowed one man to move the turret, but speed depended entirely on how fast the gunner could physically crank the handles. Mitchell watched the turret rotation, noting how slowly it moved compared to Sherman-powered traverse that used electric motors driven by the tank's electrical system. The Sherman gunner could traverse the turret 360 degrees in less than 15 seconds, using powered controls, maintaining steady tracking of moving targets with minimal physical effort. This Panzer Four gunner needed over a minute to complete a full rotation at maximum cranking speed, a pace that would exhaust any man if sustained through extended engagement. German crews relied on the commander to roughly position the turret using powered traverse available at the commander's station. Then the gunner made final aiming adjustments using his manual controls. This division of labor worked adequately when time permitted careful engagement sequences, but rapid reaction situations against multiple targets or fast-moving threats put German crews at severe disadvantage compared to American tankers, who could engage targets as quickly as the gunner could aim and fire. The coordination required between German commander and gunner introduced delays and potential miscommunication that Sherman crews avoided entirely through their integrated fire control system that gave both commander and gunner independent ability to traverse the turret quickly. The loader's position occupied the right rear of the turret, a cramped workspace surrounded by ammunition storage bins that held the ready rounds for immediate use. Private First Class David Sullivan, from Boston, Massachusetts, their own loader, climbed down to examine the German arrangement. Sullivan was a large man, over 6 feet tall, and solidly built, perfectly suited to the physical demands of loading heavy tank ammunition. He barely fit in the German loader's position, his shoulders brushing both sides of the narrow workspace simultaneously. The ammunition stowage created the most striking difference Sullivan noted compared to Sherman arrangements he worked with daily. The Panzer Four stored 75mm rounds in bins around the turret sides and floor, easily accessible, but completely unprotected from penetrating hits. Armor-piercing rounds from enemy tanks, anti-tank guns, or even heavy machine guns that penetrated the relatively thin turret sides would strike ammunition directly, with catastrophic results for the crew. The Sherman stored most ammunition in floor bins below the turret, covered by water jackets that provided protection from fire and fragments. This wet stowage system, introduced after early combat experience, showed ammunition fires were the primary cause of total tank loss, dramatically reduced the chance of catastrophic ammunition detonation when the tank was hit. German tanks had no comparable protection, accepting that ammunition hits would likely destroy the vehicle entirely. Sullivan examined the loading sequence required for the German gun, visualizing the physical movements necessary to maintain sustained fire. The loader grabbed a round from the nearest stowage bin, a 2-piece separated round with projectile and propellant charge stored separately. He lifted the projectile, weighing approximately 15 pounds for standard armor-piercing shot, and shoved it into the gun breech from the right side. Then he grabbed the propellant cartridge, weighing another 10 pounds, and loaded it behind the projectile. The breech closed automatically, and the gun was ready to fire. This loading sequence took a trained German loader approximately 8 to 10 seconds under ideal conditions, a respectable rate of fire for manually loaded tank guns. but the physical constraints of the cramped turret limited the loader's ability to work efficiently during sustained engagements. After firing 10 to 12 rounds rapidly, most loaders showed significant fatigue from the constant bending, lifting, and shoving required in the confined space, while the tank maneuvered over rough terrain that threw the loader off balance repeatedly. Sherman loaders worked in comparatively spacious conditions that allowed more efficient body mechanics and less physical strain. The larger turret diameter gave the loader room to brace himself during vehicle movement, maintaining balance and working rhythm even when the tank crossed obstacles or made sharp turns. This efficiency advantage meant Sherman loaders could sustain higher rates of fire for longer periods without the exhaustion that degraded German crew performance during extended engagements. Mitchell climbed back out of the turret and moved to the hull, pulling open the driver's hatch to examine the forward fighting compartment. The driver's station impressed him immediately with how the little room the German designers had provided for the man who controlled the vehicle's movement. The seat was a simple metal bucket with minimal padding, positioned directly in front of the transmission housing that dominated the forward hull interior. The driver sat almost reclined, his legs extended forward to reach the clutch and brake pedals that controlled steering through a complex system of differential braking. Vision devices consisted of a single periscope in the hull front glacis and a small vision port covered by an armoured flap that could be opened when tactical conditions permitted. These limited vision devices provided barely adequate forward observation under ideal conditions and became nearly useless in rain, snow, dust or smoke that obscured the narrow viewing angles. Corporal Thomas Wright, their driver from rural Pennsylvania, squeezed into the German driver's position to test the controls and evaluate the working conditions. Wright had driven farm tractors since childhood and had adapted quickly to Sherman controls during training. He found the Panzer Four driving position uncomfortable immediately, with inadequate legroom despite his average height and the seat angle forcing him into a semi-reclined posture that made precise control inputs difficult. The steering system used clutch brake operation, a mechanical arrangement common in many tracked vehicles that required the driver to disengage the clutch, apply the brake on the side opposite the desired turn direction, then re-engage the clutch to complete the turn. This sequence became automatic with experience, but demanded far more physical effort and coordination than Sherman-controlled differential steering that used simple levers to direct power flow to the desired track. Wright tested the gear shift, a long lever positioned to his right that controlled the 6-speed manual transmission. The lever required firm pressure to overcome detents between gears, and the transmission itself demanded careful synchronization of engine speed and clutch engagement to avoid grinding gears during shifts. German tank drivers received extensive training in double-clutching techniques and precise throttle control necessary to shift smoothly without damaging the transmission. Sherman drivers, by contrast, used synchronized transmissions borrowed from commercial truck applications that made gear changes simple and reliable even for relatively inexperienced operators. The ease of operation meant replacement drivers could become proficient quickly, maintaining unit effectiveness when experienced crew members were killed or wounded. German units suffered more severely when experienced drivers were lost because replacement drivers needed substantial time to develop the skills necessary for competent panzer operation. The radio operator's position occupied the right front hull, a cramped station surrounded by radio equipment that filled most of the available workspace. The operator also served as bow machine gunner, operating a hull-mounted 7.92mm machine gun through a ball mount in the front armor. Private First Class Anthony Rossi, their radio operator from Brooklyn, New York, examined the dual role position skeptically. The German arrangement required the radio operator to divide attention between monitoring radio communications and watching for targets through the machine gun sight. two tasks that demanded focused concentration simultaneously. The radio equipment itself occupied so much space that the operator worked in extremely confined conditions, with minimal ability to move or adjust position during operations. Sherman radio operators worked in more spacious hull positions, with better organized equipment arrangements that separated radio operation from combat tasks. The Sherman bow gunner position was separate from radio operation, allowing each man to focus on his primary task without divided attention. This specialization improved performance in both roles, enhancing communication effectiveness and defensive firepower simultaneously. Mitchell gathered his crew outside the Panzer Four to discuss their observations and compare notes on what they had discovered. Every crew member expressed surprise at how cramped and austere the German tank felt compared to Sherman arrangements they worked with daily. The physical discomfort alone would degrade crew performance during extended operations, and the ergonomic deficiencies created tactical disadvantages that American crews would exploit ruthlessly in combat. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The crew's informal inspection revealed design priorities that seemed to contradict everything they had heard about German engineering excellence and attention to detail. The Panzer Four prioritized specifications like armor, thickness, gun, power, and mechanical components, while treating crew accommodation as secondary consideration, barely worthy of engineering attention. German designers apparently believed that soldiers would simply endure whatever conditions were provided, adapting to discomfort and inefficiency through discipline and training. American designers, influenced by decades of automotive industry experience focused on customer satisfaction and operator comfort, understood that human factors engineering directly affected performance and effectiveness. Comfortable crews maintained alertness longer, worked more efficiently, and sustained higher performance levels through extended operations. The extra internal volume in Sherman design wasn't wasted space, but rather investment in crew effectiveness that paid dividends in combat performance and operational endurance. Mitchell's crew continued their examination by measuring internal dimensions and comparing them to Sherman specifications they knew from daily experience. The Panzer Four turret basket measured approximately 47 inches in diameter, providing barely enough room for 3 men to work without constantly interfering with each other's movements. The Sherman turret basket exceeded 69 inches in diameter, offering nearly 50% more floor area that translated into substantially more working room for the entire crew. This dimensional difference affected every aspect of turret operations. The German gun breech recoiled directly through the cramped workspace, requiring the crew to dodge the massive mechanism every time the gun fired or risk serious injury from the several thousand pounds of steel slamming backward with tremendous force. The loader particularly had to time his movements carefully to avoid being struck by the recoiling breech during loading sequences, adding mental stress to already demanding physical tasks. The Sherman's larger turret allowed the gun to be positioned with adequate clearance for the recoiling breech, protecting the crew from injury while providing more efficient workspace organization. This seemingly minor detail reflected fundamental differences in design philosophy between German and American engineering approaches. The crew's inspection continued as they examined the hull interior more thoroughly, discovering additional design compromises that prioritized mechanical components over human needs. The ammunition storage throughout the hull particularly concerned them. Rounds were stored in open racks along both sides of the fighting compartment, positioned where any penetrating hit would likely strike them directly. Mitchell counted 87 rounds total capacity, impressive by tank standards, but every single round represented a potential catastrophic explosion waiting to happen. Sullivan, their loader, traced his fingers along the storage racks thoughtfully. Back home in Boston, he had worked briefly in a munitions plant before enlisting, loading artillery shells into shipping containers. Safety protocols there had been strict, with multiple layers of protection between workers and explosive materials. Seeing tank ammunition stored with no protection whatsoever struck him as reckless disregard for crew survival. The Sherman's wet storage system suddenly seemed less like overcautious American engineering and more like simple common sense applied to life-threatening hazards. The crew discovered that German tankers had adapted to their cramped conditions through rigid discipline and carefully choreographed movements that minimized interference between crew members. Every action had to be precisely timed and executed to avoid collisions in the tight workspace. The loader couldn't begin his loading sequence until the gunner had completed aiming adjustments and moved clear. The commander couldn't traverse the cupola to check flanks while the gunner was tracking targets because their positions overlapped too much for simultaneous movement. These coordination requirements worked adequately during training exercises where time pressure was minimal and mistakes had no fatal consequences. Combat conditions introduced chaos that made precise choreography nearly impossible to maintain. Tanks maneuvered violently over rough terrain, throwing crew members off balance unpredictably. Enemy fire created noise, confusion, and the urgent need for immediate response that didn't allow time for careful coordination. The cramped workspace that seemed merely uncomfortable during peacetime training became actively dangerous in combat, where crew members had to work at maximum speed while the vehicle bucked and shuddered beneath them. Wright examined the driver's controls more carefully, testing the clutch pedal pressure and shift lever throw required for gear changes. The heavy mechanical components demanded significant physical strength to operate, particularly during extended drives when cumulative fatigue degraded muscle performance. He imagined driving this vehicle for 10 or 12 hours during an approach march. The constant clutch work and gear shifting required by the manual transmission, exhausting his left leg to the point where precise control became nearly impossible. Sherman drivers used synchronized transmissions that made shifting almost effortless, preserving driver energy for the sustained attention and quick reactions that battlefield driving demanded. The hydraulically assisted steering controls reduced physical workload even further, allowing Sherman drivers to maintain peak performance throughout extended operations. German drivers fought their vehicles constantly, wrestling heavy controls that demanded strength and endurance just to accomplish basic maneuvering. The physical demands extended beyond just driving. Every aspect of Panzer Four operation required more effort than equivalent Sherman tasks. The manual turret traverse exhausted gunners during prolonged engagements. The cramped fighting compartment forced loaders to bend and twist repeatedly while handling heavy ammunition. The limited vision devices required commanders to constantly shift viewing positions to maintain adequate battlefield awareness, creating neck and back strain during extended operations. American tankers certainly experienced fatigue during combat operations, but their vehicles were designed to minimize unnecessary physical demands, preserving crew energy for the cognitive tasks that determined tactical success. German tankers expended enormous energy just operating their equipment before even engaging the enemy, arriving at combat already partially exhausted from the effort of simply manning their positions. Mitchell climbed back into the turret one more time, this time focusing on the human elements rather than mechanical features. He noticed details that revealed how German crews had attempted to make their cramped workspace more livable. Someone had scratched names into the metal near the commander's seat, presumably the names of crew members who had served in this vehicle. A small photograph was wedged into a gap between ammunition bins, showing a young woman smiling at the camera. Someone's wife or girlfriend, carried into combat as a reminder of what waited back home. These personal touches humanized the enemy in ways that combat experience usually prevented. The German tankers who had worked in this cramped, uncomfortable space were soldiers just like Mitchell and his crew, trying to survive impossible conditions while accomplishing missions their commanders assigned. They weren't the faceless enemy that propaganda posters depicted, but rather men trapped inside machines that treated them as expendable components rather than human beings deserving consideration and care. The crew found evidence of long-term occupation in the fighting compartment. Worn spots on metal surfaces showed where elbows and knees repeatedly rubbed during normal operations. The leather padding on the gunner's seat had been replaced with makeshift canvas, suggesting the original had worn through from constant use. Someone had fashioned a crude cushion from spare cloth for the commander's seat, trying to reduce the discomfort of sitting on bare metal for hours at a time. These improvised modifications revealed how German crews had struggled with their vehicles' inadequate ergonomics, attempting repairs and improvements with whatever materials they could scavenge. Official supply channels apparently provided no accommodation for crew comfort, forcing soldiers to improvise solutions to problems that should have been addressed during design and production. The contrast with American supply systems that provided everything from replacement seat cushions to improved vision blocks highlighted fundamental differences in how the two nations valued their soldiers' well-being. Chen discovered a small journal wedged behind the gunner's seat, a personal diary that some German tanker had kept during his service. The entries were written in German, which Chen couldn't read, but the dates were clear enough. The journal covered nearly 8 months from October 1943 through May 1944, ending abruptly with no final entry explaining why the author stopped writing. Mitchell carefully placed the journal in his map case, intending to turn it over to intelligence officers who could translate it and possibly learn something useful about German tank operations. Decades later, that journal would be translated and preserved in military archives, providing historians with intimate details of daily life inside a Panzer Four. The entries described the constant discomfort of extended operations, the fear during combat engagements, the frustration with mechanical breakdowns, and the growing certainty that Germany was losing the war despite official propaganda claiming victory. The final entry, dated May 23, 1944, expressed hope that the author would survive long enough to return home to his family in Bavaria. Whether that soldier achieved his hope remained unknown. The tank was found abandoned in Normandy 2 months after that final entry, suggesting the crew had either been killed, wounded, or captured during the fighting that consumed the hedgerow country through June and July. The cramped fighting compartment that the crew had endured for months offered no protection when their luck finally ran out against American firepower and tactical superiority. The inspection concluded with Mitchell's crew photographing the interior from multiple angles, documenting the cramped conditions for intelligence reports that would circulate through armored divisions. These photographs would be studied by tank designers, tactical instructors, and combat commanders, all trying to understand how German crews functioned in such constrained environments and what advantages American tankers could exploit in future engagements. The tactical implications became clear as Mitchell summarized his observations in the written report he would submit to battalion headquarters. German crews were fighting at significant disadvantage before any shots were fired, handicapped by vehicles that demanded excessive physical effort, limited situational awareness, and created dangerous working conditions. American crews enjoyed ergonomic advantages that translated directly into superior combat performance through faster engagement sequences, sustained effectiveness during prolonged operations, and better crew survival rates when vehicles were hit. These advantages weren't immediately obvious from external observation or specification comparisons. The Panzer Four appeared formidable with its long-barreled 75mm gun and well-sloped armor. Only by examining the internal arrangements could American crews understand the full extent of German disadvantages and recognized that Sherman design prioritized factors that mattered more than impressive specifications suggested. Word of Mitchell's inspection spread through the 7th Armored Division as other crews examined captured German vehicles and confirmed similar observations. Tank commanders who had respected and feared German armor began recognizing that their own vehicles provided substantial advantages beyond what they had previously appreciated. The Sherman's spacious interior, powered turret traverse, excellent vision devices, and protected ammunition storage weren't luxury features, but rather combat multipliers that enhanced crew effectiveness in every engagement. This recognition boosted morale among American tankers who had sometimes felt inadequate facing German tanks with superior guns and thicker armor. Understanding that they fought from better-designed vehicles with significant ergonomic advantages helped offset the anxiety created by specifications that favored German equipment. Combat wasn't just about gun penetration and armor thickness, but rather about sustained crew performance under conditions of extreme stress and exhaustion. The German tankers, who had fought from that cramped Panzer Four in the hedgerows of Normandy, never had the opportunity to examine a Sherman interior and recognize their disadvantages. They fought with the equipment their nation provided, adapting to inadequate conditions through discipline and courage that couldn't overcome fundamental design deficiencies. Their sacrifice deserved recognition even as their equipment's limitations became clear to objective analysis. American intelligence officers compiled inspection reports from dozens of captured German vehicles, building comprehensive assessments of enemy equipment that revealed systematic problems throughout German armored vehicle design. The cramped fighting compartments weren't unique to the Panzer Four, but rather characterized German tank design philosophy that consistently prioritized mechanical specifications over crew accommodation. The Tiger tank, feared throughout Allied armies for its massive 88mm gun and impenetrable frontal armor, featured a fighting compartment barely larger than the Panzer Four, despite the vehicle's substantially greater size and weight. The extra tonnage went into armor and mechanical components, not internal volume for the crew. Tiger crews worked in conditions as cramped and uncomfortable as their Panzer Four counterparts, suffering the same ergonomic disadvantages that degraded performance and endangered survival. The Panther tank, introduced in 1943 as Germany's response to Soviet 34 tanks, replicated the same design priorities despite opportunities to incorporate lessons from combat experience. The fighting compartment remained cramped, the manual turret traverse still exhausted gunners, and the ammunition storage offered no protection against catastrophic detonation. German designers apparently never recognized crew accommodation as a priority worthy of engineering attention and resource allocation. This systematic blind spot reflected broader cultural assumptions about military service and soldier welfare. German military tradition emphasized duty, sacrifice, and obedience to authority, expecting soldiers to endure whatever hardships were necessary without complaint or accommodation. Comfort was considered weakness, luxury inappropriate for warriors. This attitude produced soldiers of remarkable discipline and courage, but it also created equipment that treated crews as expendable components rather than valuable assets whose effectiveness determined combat outcomes. American military culture, influenced by democratic traditions and industrial practices that valued worker welfare, approached equipment design differently. Soldiers were citizens in uniform, deserving consideration and care that enhanced their effectiveness while reducing unnecessary suffering. This attitude produced equipment that accommodated human needs and limitations, recognizing that comfortable, well-supported crews performed better and survived longer than exhausted, cramped, uncomfortable crews fighting against their own equipment's deficiencies. The contrast extended beyond just tank design into broader military systems and organizational culture. American logistics provided extensive support, keeping vehicles operational and crews supplied with necessities. Medical care for wounded soldiers emphasized rapid evacuation and comprehensive treatment. Replacement systems brought new personnel into units with training and preparation that maintained unit effectiveness. Every aspect of American military operations reflected commitment to treating soldiers as valuable individuals whose welfare directly affected mission success. German military systems, by contrast, increasingly treated soldiers as expendable resources to be consumed in hopeless defensive battles that prolonged defeat without possibility of victory. By mid-1944, when Mitchell's crew examined that captured Panzer Four, Germany was conscripting teenagers and old men to fill depleted ranks, providing minimal training before throwing them into combat against overwhelming Allied superiority. The cramped fighting compartments and inadequate equipment were just symptoms of deeper systematic failures that doomed German military efforts, regardless of individual courage or tactical skill. The Panzer Four that Mitchell's crew inspected represented thousands of similar vehicles that German industry produced throughout the war, each one condemning its crew to fight from cramped, uncomfortable, dangerous conditions that handicapped their effectiveness before combat even began. German tankers adapted to these conditions through courage and discipline, achieving remarkable tactical successes despite their disadvantages. But courage and discipline couldn't overcome systematic design deficiencies when facing enemies who combined equivalent courage and discipline with superior equipment and overwhelming material advantages. The battles in Normandy through summer 1944 demonstrated these realities with brutal clarity. German armoured units fought desperately to contain Allied breakout attempts, achieving local tactical successes through superior positioning and effective use of terrain. But sustained operations exhausted German crews fighting from inadequate vehicles, while American crews maintained effectiveness through better equipment design and superior logistics support. The cumulative advantages compounded over days and weeks until German resistance collapsed from sheer exhaustion and attrition that couldn't be replaced. Mitchell and his crew returned to their Sherman after completing their inspection, climbing into familiar positions that suddenly felt spacious and comfortable after experiencing German conditions. The powered turret traverse that they had taken for granted seemed like remarkable luxury. The protected ammunition storage that they barely noticed during normal operations became a safety feature they appreciated more deeply. Every aspect of their vehicle that had seemed ordinary and unremarkable now appeared as carefully considered design choices that enhanced their effectiveness and improved their survival chances. They fought through the remainder of the Normandy campaign and into the pursuit across France with renewed confidence in their equipment and recognition of their advantages. The Sherman's limitations in armour and firepower remained real concerns, but understanding that they fought from better-designed vehicles with superior crew accommodation provided perspective that reduced anxiety and improved morale. They were better equipped than they had realized, fighting from vehicles that treated them as valuable assets rather than expendable components. The captured Panzer Four remained behind the advancing lines, eventually transported to the United States for detailed technical examination. Engineers measured every dimension, tested every component, and documented design choices that revealed German priorities and assumptions. The cramped fighting compartment particularly interested American designers who used the comparison to validate their own design philosophy, emphasizing crew effectiveness and human factors engineering. Post-war tank development in both the United States and West Germany reflected lessons learned from wartime experience. American designers continued prioritizing crew accommodation and ergonomic efficiency, producing vehicles like the M48 Patton tank that provided spacious fighting compartments with excellent visibility and comfortable working positions. West German designers, learning from their wartime failures, emphasized crew welfare in vehicles like the Leopard 1 tank that incorporated American design principles while maintaining German engineering precision. The cramped fighting compartment of that Panzer Four captured in Normandy had taught lessons that influenced tank design for decades, demonstrating that crew effectiveness depended on more than just guns and armor. Human factors engineering mattered as much as mechanical specifications in determining combat performance. Comfortable crews fought more effectively than uncomfortable crews, regardless of their vehicle's theoretical capabilities. These lessons, learned through bitter experience and careful analysis, shaped the future of armored warfare and military equipment design throughout the Cold War era and beyond. Mitchell survived the war and returned to Detroit, resuming his career in the automotive industry with experiences that gave him unique perspective on vehicle design and human factors engineering. He occasionally told the story of examining that captured Panzer Four, emphasizing how the experience had taught him that superior engineering meant more than just impressive specifications. True, excellence meant designing equipment that enhanced human performance, rather than merely meeting technical requirements that looked good on paper. That lesson, learned in the hedgerows of Normandy during the desperate summer of 1944, influenced his work for the remainder of his career. The human cost of inadequate design could never be precisely calculated, but it was real and substantial. Every German tanker who fought from cramped fighting compartments, struggling against inadequate vision devices and exhausting manual controls, faced disadvantages that reduced effectiveness and endangered survival. Their courage and skill couldn't fully overcome systematic design deficiencies that should never have existed in the first place. They deserved better equipment than their nation provided, better consideration than their military culture allowed, and better recognition than history typically grants to soldiers who fought bravely with inadequate tools against impossible odds. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.